The land of 10,000 kings and their decrees. Whom will you serve? By Tom Seast. The land of 10,000 lakes. I still remember my first trip to Minnesota as a child in my dad's 1963 Oldsmobile 98 station wagon with its loud V8 engine. Having been raised in the middle of Illinois, we only saw an occasional lake or pond, and they were shrouded in deep mystery to us. So when we crossed the state line of Minnesota and learned that they had 10,000 lakes, we started counting. This was back in the days before we had our own television or radio, so my brother and I had a habit of counting and writing numbers. We would take note paper and start writing the integer form of the numbers in sequence, line after line. So when we crossed the state line, we started counting the lakes on that vacation. In those days, the one thing you could count on was my brother and I counting something on something. The makeup of a lake. From those days of our youthful enthusiasm, I do not recall how many lakes we counted on that trip, as many years, months, and moons have passed since those days. I do remember that we stayed at a cottage on Lake Norway and caught lots of bluegill and sunfish while visiting our relatives in Sunburg, Minnesota. But we really had no idea what the difference was in the classification of a lake or a pond. Lake versus pond versus reservoirs. I do remember that our cousins tried to educate us on the differences between a lake, a pond, a reservoir, a slough, or a marsh. But being from an area where most surface waters seem to be in rivers and streams, we found them all fascinating. We never really did have the skill set necessary to count the lakes in Minnesota because we didn't have the knowledge. With types of lakes. Within lakes, it is my understanding that the experts can't even agree on the number of classifications of lakes. I've seen numbers that vary anywhere from 11 to 22 different classifications of lakes, and my brother and I failed to make these distinctions as well. We were counting our lakes, or whatever we thought were lakes, and we did find joy in the counting. The real lake count. While I have attempted to determine the actual number of lakes in Minnesota, the unofficial number that I've found is that there are 11,842 lakes in Minnesota that are 10 acres in size or larger. Minnesota, it seems, has a large amount of water that is unwilling to maintain its rightful place below the surface of the ground, which makes it a land of recreational activities based around these bodies of water. 10,000 bloodsuckers. The other thing I learned on that trip to Minnesota was that it was the state of 10,000 bloodsuckers. It seemed like each of us would get about 100 gazillion mosquito bites per day, and came home from that trip with bumps all over our smallish bodies. Being from Illinois, we weren't strangers to blood-sucking insects, but had never been exposed to the herds or flocks of mosquitoes that Minnesota had. It bugs me. It still bugs me that there are over 3,500 species of small insects belonging to the order Diptera, flies, that are classified as mosquitoes, because it makes it next to impossible to count which of the blood-sucking savages is currently feasting on the contents of my arteries and veins. I literally can't tell my ants from a hole in the ground, but I digress. Bloodsuckers of a different kind. After living in Illinois and traveling to Minnesota, I can assure you that both states have been taken over by a new breed of bloodsucker, a much more dangerous and long-lasting type. I'm referring to, of course, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the regulators, the agencies, and every other type of blood-sucking swamp dweller that comes out and wants to claim a piece of your life's blood and resources. Too many to count. Even in our best counting days, I don't think my brother and I would have had the skills, tenacity, and time to count the number of bloodsuckers that claim to have dominion over us in the modern era, here in the land of the free. People now claim, through decrees, to have authority to tell me what I can eat, where I can sleep, what I can do, where I can poop and pee, how I can breathe, what medicines I can take, and much, much more. Of course, it's become next to impossible to tell who really has any true authority in any given situation, given the sheer number of bloodsuckers out there. Even while swatting continuously, it's difficult to tell which king is really king over all the land. I've concluded that it must be either the king that has the bestest guns or the mostest money, or both, but I'm really not sure. I'll stand by for someone to tell me. Ignorant serf. Until they reduce their numbers to the point where I can count them, I'll probably still remain an ignorant serf, serving at their pleasure and at the pleasure of those that vote or appoint them. For I certainly cannot exist without them protecting me for my own safety. Their virtue remains beyond reproach as they rule from their towers of glory. Me. I serve a king, a master, and a savior, and have given him dominion over my life. Until I finally get to meet him face to face, I'll serve at the decree of the 10,000 bloodsuckers that claim to protect me from myself for my freedom. Feel free to follow my ramblings at the links listed below.